The final production bill for the Walt Disney Company's live-action remake of Snow White, starring Rachel Zegler, likely to come in at around $300 million, which would be pretty bad considering what I think Disney believes this movie is going to do in the box office, especially after other such flops like The Little Mermaid. Let's talk about it. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. So there was a bit of confusion a few days ago when a new article came out from Reid and Forbes magazine showing why Disney's Snow White remake must gross $340 million at the box office. A lot of folks just saw the headline and didn't read into the article. It's not really a mistake per se, it's just how Reid has been calculating these financial returns that come in from the UK, where certain films, in this case that Disney does, are produced. Roughly once a year, these film production companies will file a financial return with the United Kingdom government in order to secure the tax relief or the film tax credits that they're due, and this is why these studios shoot in the UK to begin with. Those financial returns will pile up their expenses over the course of several years' worth of pre-production, principal photography, and then, of course, post-production, which is a very labor-intensive and time-consuming part of the cinematic producing process. Think about things like all the editing that has to be done to clip the movie together, visual effects, CGI, everything that goes into post-production, even a lot more work, I would argue, than principal photography itself. From the article, Disney's upcoming live-action remake of its classic cartoon, Snow White, will have to gross at least $336.4 million to break even, according to an analysis of recently released financial filings. The film is not due to debut until March of next year, but it's already been blasted by critics over the changes it makes to the 1937 classic, which won Walt Disney an honorary Oscar. The biggest bone of contention is the casting of the title role, which went to West Side Story's Rachel Zegler, a Latina actress of Colombian descent. Zegler caused an outcry by telling Variety that the remake Snow White is, quote, not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. But when it comes to the money side of things, recently filed financial statements show that over 3 years, through July 31st, 2022, Disney spent $209.3 million or 150 million British pounds sterling on making the movie. Up to that point, the filings add that the colossal costs was partly driven by the pandemic, causing delays to the production of the motion picture. And to be fair, that hampered a lot of productions over the last several years, adding in tens of millions of dollars of additional unforeseen costs because of lockdowns or because of pandemic-era additional protocols that required much greater expenditures for these productions to complete. But be that as it may, here is the available timeline of production from IMDb Pro. The film was announced back in November of 2016. Pre-production began October 21st of 2019, of course, just a few months before the pandemic lockdowns struck the globe. Then you had February 7th of 2022. Pre-production effectively picked up again. Filming began on March 15th of 2022. And post-production began over the summer of 2022. And here's the most recent financial filing in the UK. You can see for the year ended for this film production company was 31st July of 2022. So according to this would represent the completion of principal photography, but very, very little, if any, of post-production work would have been in these figures. So the Walt Disney Company had already spent about $200 million or the equivalent thereof in Great Britain by the time this movie entered into post-production. Again, no editing had really been done yet, no CGI, no VFX. The movie had really not been scored. And to make matters worse, what else do we know happened more recently? The movie went back in for reshoots, as so many Walt Disney pictures often do. Now, we don't know quite the extent of these reshoots. What we did see, however, of course, is what broke the story open of what this Snow White remake is really going to look like. How could anybody forget this image that came from the UK Daily Mail back in mid-July, just a few months ago? This is what's supposed to be the Seven Dwarfs. And this right here is Walt Disney's biggest problem, is this image. If I had showed you this picture in the absence of the article or in the absence of the context of this video as Snow White, this is unrecognizable as the 1937 classic film that put Walt Disney Studios on the map. It seemed initially that Disney was set to cast 7 little people in the roles of the 7 dwarves, as one may expect. But after some backlash from people like Peter Dinklage, who were offended for some reason by this, Disney changed course and hired 7 hippies. And as much as the costs are a problem for this film, it's the box office looking at this that may turn out to be atrocious. Those images were for some reshoots that were being done in the last few months, so that means even more costs were added on to just simple post-production. Don't know how much those reshoots were, but given how much money Disney had already spent through the last financial filing that ran through the end of July last summer in 2022, at $200 million US, the final spend on this movie is very likely to be somewhere close to $300 million US. Now, of course, Disney is going to get some of that back from the United Kingdom in the way of the film tax credit, which, as I said before, is the whole reason you film there to begin with. So let's say, for example, that Disney's net cost on this movie, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, after spending all the money to complete the project, getting money back from the UK in film tax credits, you can probably expect it's still going to be close to $250 million, $250 million for this. Disney is going to spend another $100 million at the bare minimum on marketing this film globally into theaters. That's going to put Disney's all-in cost somewhere around $350 million. That's going to force this movie to have to collect about $700 million at the global box office retail level to net back that $350 and cover their costs. So why then does Caroline Reid say that $340 million is the global box office needed to cover the costs? Well, it's very simple. What Caroline Reid is looking at is the money as it's reported aspect. What she's saying is, through July of 2022, this is what Disney spent. Assuming for the moment they spend not another dime on this film, the film would need $340 million. Again, assuming that Disney does no post-production, no additional photography, spends $0 on marketing the film, which, again, marketing costs do not get reported through the FPCs or the film production companies in the UK. Those are strictly production costs. Now, to be very clear, Caroline Reid is a very, very sharp lady, and she knows darn well that the spending for this movie, as of the last financial return that she covered in her article, is not the end of the game. She's simply telling you, as of this moment, as of the data that we actually have in hand, this is the threshold it has to meet. But she even states in the article that, of course, a lot of post-production and all of the things that come after principal photography are not yet in the till. So that's why it's important to read through everything. I'm sure sometime next year, probably around this time, when the film production company for Snow White remake at Disney comes out with their next financial return, and we see probably another 100 million plus British pound sterling added to the top of that pile, Caroline Reid will, of course, update her figures and give us a final tally. But again, she only does it based on the production costs because that's what she has. That's what she has the real data on. So I appreciate what she does, and I understand what she's doing. So as folks read her articles when they come out and her reports, understand that she's only giving you the information based on what is actually in hand at the moment. A $700 million threshold at the global box office for this movie is going to be a very tall ladder to climb. The Little Mermaid, just in the last few months, struggled to get past $500 million at the global box office. A movie that, by all rights, should have easily been able to hit the billion mark. That's a movie that should have been competing with Super Mario Brothers and competing with Barbie for sure this year. But it didn't, because Disney took an original concept from decades ago that was extraordinarily popular and then changed it. This movie, Snow White, might even have a bigger problem because it looks absolutely nothing like the original. The original's biggest signature piece was, of course, the seven dwarves themselves, which are completely absent in this film. And it also doesn't help that Rachel Zegler has been out on a tear with her self-righteous attitude, especially during the strikes, and what she thinks she deserves. Things like wanting to be paid for every minute that somebody watches her in a Snow White costume on screen. Or how about the radical changes that she promises this movie will bring to the original, meaning that this movie is going to be Snow White in name only. Nothing about this story is going to reflect the most iconic version of this fairy tale that Walt did back in 1937. Why Disney would want to deviate from the original that was so beloved is beyond me. They already own the best version, or I should say the most popular and well-known version of this Snow White story. But they've chosen to chuck it out the window for modern audiences. Good luck with that, Disney. Can't wait to see how that works out because, as we all know, once these films leave the theater, there's no money train left for them anywhere. At least nowhere near enough. PVOD sales and rentals just aren't going to make up the bills for this one, especially if this movie turns in a performance that is going to be south of The Little Mermaid, which I fully expect it will. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Are you surprised by how much Disney is spending or has spent through this point on this new Snow White remake? And what do you think it's going to do when it gets to the box office? Share those thoughts down below in the comments. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe. And of course, join us Sunday afternoon, September 24th, right here on Valiant Renegade for the weekly live show at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to be talking about all this stuff in greater detail then. Hope to see you there. And until then, take care.